In 1940, my friend's great-grandmother asked a Ouija board a terrible question, and it answered. Those of us drawn to the paranormal often find ourselves in strange conversations, ones that don't belong in normal daylight. Conversations about things unseen, unexplained, unwelcome. I've had my share of them. The usual stories. Footsteps in empty hallways. Cold air brushing against your neck when no window is open. Shadows that move when you're not looking directly at them. But sometimes something comes along that doesn't just unsettle you. It stays with you. This story came to me through a close friend of mine, Josh English, a brilliant musician, but more importantly, the keeper of something far darker than talent. What he shared wasn't just a ghost story. It was a warning, a story passed down through generations in his family, told not for entertainment, but as a rule that was never meant to be broken. Josh told me this was something his nan used to speak about with absolute seriousness. No laughter, no exaggeration, just a quiet, heavy fear behind her eyes every time the subject came up. And it always started the same way. In the 1940s, something answered us. The exact date has been lost. Time has a way of erasing details, but not trauma. Trauma lingers. It reshapes itself, becoming sharper, darker with every retelling. Back then, his great-grandparents, Joseph and Jane, lived together with their young daughter, Elizabeth. But they weren't alone. Joseph had a daughter from a previous marriage, Caroline, and for a few weeks, she came to stay. That's when everything began to rot. At first, it was small things. Tension, sharp words, cold stares across the dinner table. Jane and Caroline did not get along, not even slightly. What should have been a temporary stay started to feel like an endless intrusion. The house changed. Josh described it the way his nan used to. It didn't feel like home anymore. It felt watched. Jane grew restless, irritated, then angry. Caroline's presence became unbearable to her. But something else came with her. Something no one noticed at first. Doors would creak open in the night, even when locked. Soft footsteps echoed in empty rooms. And Elizabeth, the little girl, started talking to someone no one could see. She says Caroline brought her. Elizabeth whispered one night. No one took it seriously. Not yet. Because the real mistake hadn't happened. Not until that night. The night Jane invited her friends over, just to forget everything. The house was quieter without the tension for a few hours. Laughter returned. Light conversation. The kind of normalcy that makes you forget the unease creeping just beneath the surface. Until someone suggested it. Let's play something. The lights dimmed. The curtains closed. And from somewhere deep inside the house, they brought out the Ouija board. At first, it was nothing. Just harmless fun. Just a game. Until Jane asked the question. And something finally answered. At first, it went exactly as expected. Laughter filled the room. Fingers lightly rested on the planchette as it lazily slid across the board, spelling out nonsense answers to even more nonsensical questions. Who will get married next? Is anyone here lying? Giggles. Accusations. Playful shoves. It felt harmless. Safe. But that illusion didn't last long. Jane had been quiet for a while now, sitting stiffly, watching, waiting. The irritation she had buried earlier was slowly clawing its way back to the surface. Caroline. Her name echoed in Jane's mind like a splinter she couldn't pull out. Without warning, Jane leaned forward slightly, her fingers pressing harder against the planchette. Her voice cut through the room. When will the daughter be gone? The movement stopped. Completely. The planchette froze under their fingertips. For a moment, no one spoke. Then someone chuckled nervously. All right, who's doing that? Very funny. Jane didn't smile. She asked again. When will she be gone? Still nothing. The air in the room began to feel wrong. Heavier. Like the oxygen had thickened. One of the girls shifted uncomfortably. Another pulled her hand back slightly. Jane, maybe. Again, Jane snapped. This time her voice wasn't just irritated. It was sharp, demanding. When will the daughter be gone? And that's when it happened. Every single person at the table felt it at the exact same moment. A sudden, violent cold. Not the kind that creeps in slowly, but the kind that hits you, like stepping into freezing water. One of them gasped. Another swore under her breath. And then, the planchette moved. Not slowly, not playfully, violently. It jerked across the board so fast their fingers struggled to keep up, as if something on the other side was no longer pretending. As if something had been waiting, watching, listening. The wooden piece slammed from letter to letter with unnatural force. S-H-E. A silence fell over the room, so deep it felt suffocating. W-I-L-L. One girl tried to pull her hand away, but she couldn't. Not immediately, like her fingers were stuck. B-E. Jane's breathing became shallow. Her anger gone, replaced with something else. Something colder. G-O-N-E. The final word came slower. Deliberate. S-O-O-N. The planchette stopped. Dead still. But no one moved. No one spoke. Because something was wrong. Terribly wrong. One of the women whispered, barely audible. Who pushed that? No one answered. Because they all knew the truth. No one had. The candles flickered violently. And for just a second, Jane swore she saw something behind Caroline's empty chair. A shape. Tall. Unnaturally still. Watching. She blinked. And it was gone. That was enough. Chairs scraped harshly against the wooden floor as everyone pulled back at once. Hands trembled. Faces pale. That's it, someone said quickly. We're done. That's not funny anymore. No one argued. The board was shoved away. The candles were blown out too quickly. The laughter from earlier? Gone. Replaced by a silence that followed each of them as they left. But the worst part wasn't the message. It wasn't even the cold. It was what happened next. As Jane stood alone in the room, trying to steady her breathing, she heard something. A voice. Soft. Right behind her ear. A whisper. You asked. Jane froze. Her blood turned to ice. So I will take her. Jane didn't sleep that night. How could she? Every time she closed her eyes, she felt it again, that whisper brushing against her ear. You asked, so I will take her. She kept telling herself it wasn't real. Just her imagination. Just the lingering effect of a silly game taken too far. But deep down, she knew it wasn't. The house felt different the next morning. Not quieter. Not louder. Just wrong. Like something had settled inside it. Something that hadn't been there before. At breakfast, no one spoke much. Joseph read the paper, unaware of what had happened the night before. Little Elizabeth sat silently, staring at her bowl. Caroline, however, seemed completely normal. Too normal. She was calm, quiet, almost distant, as if she hadn't noticed anything at all. Jane kept watching her, waiting for something, anything, but nothing came. Until that night. It started with Elizabeth. Jane was passing by her room when she heard her talking again. Soft whispers, the same ones from before. Jane slowly pushed the door open. Elizabeth sat on her bed, facing the corner of the room, her back to the door. Who are you talking to? Jane asked carefully. Elizabeth didn't turn around. My friend, she said softly. Jane's chest tightened. What friend? A pause. Then, the one Caroline brought. Jane's heart skipped. A cold wave washed over her body. Elizabeth, she whispered, stepping closer. Turn around. Slowly, very slowly. Elizabeth turned her head. Her eyes looked normal, but her smile, it wasn't. Too wide, too still. And then she said something that made Jane's blood run cold. She says you shouldn't have asked. Jane stumbled back slightly. No, that's not funny, she said, her voice shaking. Who told you to say that? Elizabeth blinked. The smile disappeared instantly. Confusion replaced it. What do you mean? She said innocently. I didn't say anything. Jane froze. Her breathing grew uneven. Because she knew. She had heard it. Clear as day. That night, things got worse. Much worse. Around midnight, a loud thud echoed through the house. Joseph woke up instantly. What was that? He muttered, getting out of bed. Jane followed him, her heart pounding. They checked every room, every corner. Nothing. Until they reached the hallway. Caroline's door was open, slowly creaking back and forth. Jane frowned. Wasn't that closed? Joseph shrugged, stepping forward. Caroline, he called. No response. He pushed the door open wider. The room was empty. The window, however, was wide open. Curtains blowing violently in the cold night air. That's strange, Joseph muttered. Where would she go at this hour? Jane didn't answer, because she had noticed something else. Something far worse. On the inside of the fogged-up window, words had been written, not from outside, from inside. 3 simple words, slowly traced, as if someone had taken their time writing them. Jane stepped closer, her legs trembling, and read them out loud. She will go. Suddenly, slam. The door behind them shut violently. Jane screamed. Joseph spun around, but there was no one there. And from somewhere deep inside the house, A faint sound echoed. Not footsteps, not movement, but something else. A quiet, low laugh. By morning, Caroline was back, as if nothing had happened. Jane stood frozen in the kitchen doorway as Caroline walked in calmly, brushing dust off her coat like she had simply stepped outside for fresh air. "Where were you?" Joseph asked, confused. Caroline looked at him, then at Jane. A strange pause followed. "I don't remember," she said quietly. Jane felt her stomach drop, because that wasn't entirely true. Caroline's eyes, they didn't look empty. They looked occupied, like someone else was standing behind them, watching, waiting. And then, just for a split second, Caroline smiled. Not at Joseph, not at anyone, just smiled. Jane turned away immediately. Something inside her screamed that this wasn't right, that something had already begun. The rest of the day passed in suffocating tension. No one spoke about the night before. No one mentioned the window, the words, the laughter, but the house. It hadn't forgotten. That evening, Elizabeth refused to eat. "She's hungry," she whispered, staring at Caroline. Jane snapped. "Who is?" Elizabeth slowly pointed. Not at Caroline. Behind her. Jane's breath caught in her throat. But when she looked, there was nothing there. Of course there wasn't. There never was. Not when you looked directly. That night, the phone rang. A sharp, sudden sound that cut through the silence. Joseph answered. His face changed instantly. "What? When?" he shouted. Jane's heart began to race. Joseph turned slowly. "There's been an emergency," he said. "At her mother's house. Caroline has to go." Immediately, the room went cold. Jane felt it again. That same unnatural chill from the Ouija board. The same one. The same presence. Her mind screamed. No, but her mouth stayed shut. Everything moved quickly after that. Arrangements were made. Bags packed. No time to think. No time to question. No time to stop what had already been set in motion. The next morning, they stood at the airport. The sky was gray. Heavy. Unnatural. Jane watched Caroline from a distance. Something felt off. Even now. Even here. Caroline turned. Looked directly at Jane. And for the first time, her lips moved without sound. Jane couldn't hear it, but she could read it. "You asked." Jane's blood ran cold. She shook her head slightly, whispering under her breath. No, I didn't mean." But it was too late. Caroline boarded the plane. Joseph placed a comforting hand on Jane's shoulder. "It'll be fine," he said. Jane didn't respond, because deep down, she knew something terrible was about to happen. The engines roared. The plane began to move. Faster, faster. Jane's heartbeat matched its rhythm. Then, it lifted. For a brief moment, everything seemed normal, until it wasn't. A loud, violent crack echoed through the sky. The engine exploded. Flames burst outward. People screamed. The plane jerked unnaturally. And then, it dropped, like something had pulled it down. Not gravity. Something else. Something intentional. Jane's vision blurred as the aircraft plummeted toward the ground. And just before impact, she saw it. Inside one of the windows. Not Caroline. Not a passenger. But a tall, dark shape. Standing behind them. Smiling. The crash was instant. Brutal. Final. Silence followed. Jane collapsed to her knees. Because she understood now. This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't fate. This was an answer. The crash changed everything. But it didn't end anything. In the days that followed, silence took over the house. Not the peaceful kind, but the heavy, suffocating silence that presses against your ears until you can hear your own heartbeat. No one spoke about the Ouija board. No one spoke about the message. And no one dared to mention what Jane had seen in the plane window. Caroline was gone, just like it said. But the feeling in the house, it stayed. Jane stopped sleeping altogether. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw it again. The dark figure standing behind Caroline, smiling as the plane fell from the sky. At first, she tried to convince herself it was guilt, grief, shock, anything but the truth. But the truth didn't need her belief, because it was still there, watching, waiting. A week after the funeral, Elizabeth spoke again. Jane found her sitting alone in the hallway, whispering softly into the empty air. Jane's chest tightened. "Elizabeth," she said slowly, "who are you talking to?" Elizabeth didn't look scared. She didn't even hesitate. "She came back," she said. Jane froze. "Who came back?" Elizabeth turned her head slightly and pointed down the dark hallway. Jane followed her finger, her heart pounding violently. But at first, there was nothing. Just darkness. Just silence. And then, movement. Something shifted, barely visible, like a shadow pulling itself away from the wall. Jane stumbled back. No, no, that's not possible, she whispered. Elizabeth smiled softly. She says she's not alone anymore. Jane's breath stopped, because in that moment, she felt it. That same cold, that same presence. Stronger now. Closer. As if whatever had answered the board hadn't just taken something. It had attached itself to them. Days turned into weeks, and the house grew worse. Doors slammed in the middle of the night. Whispers echoed through empty rooms. Footsteps followed Jane wherever she went. But the worst part? Sometimes she heard Caroline's voice. Soft, distant, crying, "Help me." But when Jane tried to follow it, the voice would change, twist, break into something unnatural, something inhuman. You asked for this. That's when Jane finally understood. This wasn't a prediction. It wasn't fate. It was a deal, and she had made it, without even realizing. Years later, when Elizabeth grew older, the story was passed down to her. Not as a memory, not as a tragedy, but as a warning, a rule carved into the family's existence. And she carried it with her for the rest of her life. The same rule she would later pass to Josh. And now, to anyone willing to listen. Because some questions don't just get answered, they get accepted. And something always listens. Even now, even here. So before you ever think about sitting down, before you place your fingers on that board, before you ask something out loud, ask yourself one thing. What if something is waiting for you to ask? If this story gave you chills, make sure you subscribe and join us for more terrifying stories that blur the line between reality and the unknown. And tell me in the comments, do you think it was just a coincidence, or did something truly answer Jane that night? Because after hearing this, would you ever dare to use a Ouija board?